Hey friends, it's Jess with Virtually Visual and welcome back to the channel. It's been a hot minute since I've done a tutorial, so I'm really excited to be back today and hope you guys are excited to dive into something new together. We're going to be finally addressing the new fluid system from Cinema 4D. We are going to dive into making this kind of lava lamp-like simulation. So we have some orbs kind of floating in the air and those are soft bodies, and then we have some fluid being emitted that also kind of pushes against the orbs. Let's just dive right in, folks. All right, so in a fresh scene, we are going to start pulling in some spheres. So I'm going to go directly to the objects menu right here, and we're going to just grab a sphere right away. So we've got one on our scene. I'm also going to turn off our work plane. And before I do anything else, I'm just going to quickly save. So if we run into any crashes at any point, we have this ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to hold Alt to rotate around my scene with my cursor. And I'm going to just resize this sphere down to probably around 30. And then I'm just going to hold Control and start dragging some copies of this sphere. So I'm just going to drag these around. These are going to be the orbs that our liquid will kind of crash into as it moves upward. So drag however many copies you would like for your particular scene. And then we're just going to scale some of these down at random or scale them up a little bit if you'd like. So now I'm going to highlight all of my spheres in my layers panel. And we're going to navigate to the left menu with our tools, and we're going to locate dynamic place. So when you use dynamic place, it'll kind of flash different icons a second, and then we get this new gizmo that has axes as well, and then boxes almost like you're scaling stuff. So if we actually click and drag on one of these boxes, you can push things further out, and you can also pull them in. And when you pull them in, the objects almost start to act like rigid bodies. They actually interact and allow you to move things around in a more dynamic manner. So you can keep dragging these and get something new and unique as far as their placement. This is just super fun to play with. I highly recommend you just try this out. You can also rotate things around like this. And yeah, just have a lot of fun with it. And this is also where you can click on an individual object too and start moving them as well. So maybe these are the placements we want for our spheres. So something about right here. So I'm going to highlight all of our spheres and then hit Alt and G on our keyboard. And that's going to put them all into a group. So I'm just going to call this spheres. And then I'm also going to hold down Alt, go into this menu right here by holding down my cursor and press on the connect. And that will also put our group into a connect object if we're holding down Alt when we release that icon. So I'm going to call this spheres as well. Having it in a connect object will just make it easier to simulate whatever simulation tag we put on our spheres instead of having a tag on each individual object. Now we'll only have one that we have to put it on. So if we right click, we can go to simulation tags and we are going to grab the soft body. And soft body, for those who may have not used it before, this treats objects like more of a rubbery, jelly-like material. So instead of something like cloth that will just kind of fold over itself and be kind of soft and very bendable, also unlike balloon, which will actually have some pressure inside of it, soft body is going to be more like a rubbery surface. So something that has some give to it, but is still somewhat stiff and keeps its shape. So let's actually go to the soft body menu. This is where you have some settings you can play with. The only one I'm really going to mess with today is this density. So this will control how many poles are spread throughout the object. So you can see as I drag this down, we get less and less poles. And this will actually control the stiffness of that object when it is colliding with things. So I like to put this to somewhere around 50%. So I think that's good. Also, if you ever make any change with where the spheres are laid out, or if you add new spheres, you're going to want to hit this refresh button and it will just make sure it adds poles to all of the objects in your scene. So that's just something to keep in mind. Next, I'm actually going to pull in a cube. So we're going to grab one of those. We're going to go to our normal placement or transform tool, and then we'll get those yellow icons to change the shape of this cube. I want to make this taller, and I'm going to drag this up a little bit in our scene, something like right there. And something that could also be helpful for us as we're working is by clicking on the cube, going to the coordinates menu, going to the basics menu and checking X-ray. And this will allow us just to see through that a little bit. So we can kind of look at where our cube is placed and make sure it's kind of centered with stuff. You can scale this down as much as you need. I'll just keep it kind of default there. The main thing I'm worried about is the height. So let's say about right there. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can see the full thing. I'm also then going to right click on the cube, go to simulation tags, and we're going to add a collider this time. And we can take the bounciness all the way down, and I'm going to set the collision side to both. And this is so that when we have fluids As they are moving upward, they eventually will collect at the ceiling or the top of this cube and have something to actually run into, so a surface that it will hit like a ground. Once we have that, we can actually just hide the cube. We don't really need to worry about that anymore. We know it's there, it's just going to be working without being visible. The next thing is actually pulling in an emitter. So this is going to be the part where we set up our liquids. But the first step for those who haven't dove into Cinema's system yet is we're going to set up a actual particle simulation. And then once we have those details tuned in, we will say, okay, now turn these particles into a liquid. So the emitters can be found up here under simulate. So you can see we have these particles sections with all these options here and also some stuff down here. We're going to go to the emitters tab and we're going to pull in a basic emitter. And you can see it pulls in a cube by default. I'm just going to scale this down, maybe to about right here. And then I'm going to pull this below all of our spheres. And I'm also going to rotate this. So I hit R on my keyboard. I'm going to click and drag on this particular slider. And I'm also going to hold shift. And this will give me increments of 5 as I drag. So you can see there's a little number at the top of the wheel that shows the value. So we're at 90 degrees now. I'm going to try to center this with everything. And you could choose whatever shape you want. If you click on the emitter and you're in the emission tab, you can see our shape is a rectangle. I like to sometimes just change this to circle just so it's a little bit smoother, and that just gives us that shape. So this is what we're going to be working with. And then what we can do is we can go directly to the properties section, and I'm going to just set the speed to 0 for velocity because I don't want this to have any speed by default. Then if we hit play, I can show you kind of what we're looking at. So you can see everything just falls to the surface because the gravity is enabled right now. And I want to actually turn that off. So I'm going to first hit save on my keyboard, then hit Command or Control D, and that will bring me to our scene settings. And we're going to go into the simulation tab, then scene again, and we're going to turn off gravity by setting that value to 0. So once we do that, things should not fall anymore, and they should just kind of stay in place. So there's a couple things we need to be doing. I want the fluids or the particles to actually be moving upwards, but I don't want the spheres to really move around that much. I kind of want them to hold their place. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to simulate, and we're going to go to forces, and we're going to grab gravity. And we're going to set this actually to a negative value so things move upwards. So I'm going to say maybe like negative 500. I don't want it to be quite as strong as default, but setting it negative is important. And I'm going to drag that directly into the particle group section. Now, if I do that, it's still also going to affect our soft bodies. So you can see those also move upwards, which could be interesting, but probably isn't the look we're going for. So the other thing we can do is if we go back to our soft body jellyfish icon on our spheres, and we go to the mix animation tab, we have this option to add pinning or force to keep our spheres in place. So I tend to opt to use pins. They both do essentially the same thing, but just in different calculation ways. So with pins, setting it to 100% is going to keep those spheres directly in place, and they're really not going to have that much interaction. So what we want to do is maybe set this to about 10 or 20%. So I'll do 20 just to be safe. And you'll see the spheres will move upwards a little bit, but then kind of stay in their spot. So that is good to see. The other thing though is the particles are not currently interacting at all with the objects. They're just kind of moving through them. And even if you have a collider tag on something, you might think, oh, well, they should be interacting. But we actually need to tell the particles that they have to be colliding with things. So back in the simulate menu in modifiers, we have this collide option. So let's grab that. And if you pull that down into your particle group as well, and then we hit play, they should interact now with the spheres. So that's what you want to be seeing. So if you're not, check your settings, check that you have the collide modifier, check that you have the right tags on things, and you should be good to go. The next step I'm going to do though is I'm going to return to our emitter in the emission tab. I'm going to set the rate to something like maybe 5,000 instead of 100. And that will just give us many more particles, so something like this. And then I also don't just want the emitter to just be staying in one spot. I think it's more interesting if it moves around. And I could go in and add keyframes for the position, but that would just be kind of manual and take a long time. So something you can do easily to add kind of a random motion is by right-clicking on your object, go to animation tags, and locate this vibrate tag. And we want to enable position, and this will allow this emitter to move around randomly based off of these values we give it and the frequency. So right now at 100 centimeters in the x-axis, it's just going to move around within 100 centimeters on a frequency of 2. So you can see this is what we get by default. So a lot more interesting. You could also add values though in the y and z axis as well. So maybe less for the y value because I don't want it to move up as much. So maybe 30 centimeters there, but we could say 100 centimeters also for the z. And now when we hit play, it moves around much more randomly. So something like that. Also, one thing I forgot to do that I want to do is go to our cube. Let's make this editable. I'm going to remove the bottom face because I think some of our particles were interacting with that and I don't want that. So I just went to face value, clicked on the bottom face and then hit delete. And you'll have to hit C on your cube to turn that editable, and you will lose the ability to change the size of the cube that way. So just know that when you're going into this. So let's hide that again and let's hit play now. And here's what we're working with. So this is really interesting. I think that's fun. But there's a couple other modifiers we want to add to our simulation. So to make the particles a little bit more interesting. So first thing I'm going to do is we're going to go back to simulate and we're going to go to the modifiers, and I'm going to grab the flock modifier. And then before I move that, I'm also going to go to forces and I'm going to grab friction. And I'm going to pull in friction first to our particle group. And we can just leave those at the default settings. That will kind of slow down the particles a little bit and just have them almost interacting with each other. Using flock, if we pull that into our scene as well, flock will give us the ability to kind of push the particles apart a little bit and also bring them together. So the reason why this is important is, say you do a default particle simulation, sometimes the particles look like they're intersecting with each other, and the particle sims don't currently have particle-to-particle collisions. So using this flock modifier allows us to almost fake that. So we have these sections for cohesion and separation. Cohesion will draw things together based on the search radius you have it looking for. So within 5 centimeters, it's going to draw things together. And separation will also say, push particles apart for this radius. So it's kind of helpful to know the size of your particles, which I believe it's 1 by default. So if we say like 1 or 1 point whatever, that will give us a better distance for our particles to be pushed apart. So I want to set this maybe to like 3 for the strength, and maybe cohesion we'll say 10 just to play with that. I'm also going to take the strength of the flocking all the way up, and I'm going to change this maximum speed. If we just click and drag this up to the edge here, it'll just be at 100%, and that will also slow down the speed a little bit too. So let's hit play now. You can see things get a little bit chaotic, so this is where you just have to play with the flocking settings a little. Let's change the cohesion strength. Let's try 20, and let's set this separation back to 1 maybe. So yeah, now you can see that it is really pulling things together and the separation isn't quite as intense. So maybe we set this to 2 for separation, or we can just keep it at 1 and maybe set the cohesion strength to 15. So this is where you just got to play around with things, get a feel for what you like. Maybe setting that to 5 is actually best. I don't want them to be too stuck together. But the final modifier that I think helps add the most realism to our liquids is by actually adding the Liquify modifier. And this is new with the liquid system and is super helpful for turning your particle simulations into an actual liquid. So we can drag this below flock in our particle group, and you can see we have all these settings in here. If we leave it at default, this is what we'll get. So you can see it kind of makes the particles huge all of a sudden. And so we need to just kind of play around with some of these settings. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the interaction mass to 0.1. This will have more of an impact than when the things interact with the spheres. I'm also going to set the viscosity to maybe 1. And we may change that. And then let's see, friction I think we can keep. We may have to then go back and play with some of the speed in the flock modifier. So maybe we want to set this to 500 and just see if that helps speed things up and not keep it so globby. So let's hit play now. You can see that the fluid is interacting with the spheres and moving them around a little bit. But the other thing is I think things are still too, it's still too thick, the liquid. So again, you just have to go in, play a lot around with these settings. Maybe you want to take surface tension up as well. And let's see, what else do we want to do? Maybe we set damping to 5. Again, I think we might be able to go back to flock and also increase the speed again. Let's try this now. it might even just be too many particles. So the other thing you could do is go to your basic emitter, maybe set the emission to like 2000 instead. And then we can also play with the density distribution. So uniform is nice, but sometimes noise is also exciting to play with. You could change the animation speed. So this will distribute the particles differently. So if we do that, then you get a little bit of a more unique stream of stuff in your scene. So I think that's kind of cool. Maybe we want to increase the values on our vibrate tag. So maybe 200 and 200 for the X and Z axis. And you could leave it at 2, or we could change that to 1 if it's too much. But I think that's kind of interesting. Let's also increase our frames in our scene to like 150 or 200. And let's change the frequency of this maybe to 1.5. So let's try that now. This is where we might also want to go back to the noise and maybe lower that contrast that I added. You could maybe increase the emission of the particles again then to 5000, unless this will make it too globby again, so this is up to you. This is where you just got to play around a little bit with all of these settings for the different parts of the particle emitter. So I think that's kind of interesting, so maybe we want to do that. Oh, and one other thing that I didn't do yet, if we hit Control and D in our keyboard, let's go to the particle section in our simulation tab. We need to increase the substeps of our fluid simulation, or our particle simulation. So I'm going to set this to like 4, and then compactify threshold. I don't really fully understand what this does, but I'm going to increase that to about 50 or 60%, and let's hit play now. Yeah, so I think this is cool. And if our spheres aren't bouncy enough or moving around as much, again, we can lower the mix animation pinning. So maybe I'll set this to 12%. And maybe we'll go to the soft body tag and lower that density even further, something like that. And let's try this again. Let's just see how they interact. We want to nail down the interactions before we turn this into a fluid mesh. So that's just something to keep in mind. Looks really cool. And I might finally just increase the frequency of the vibrate back to 2. I kind of liked how that looked. You can also lower the viscosity in our Liquify tag. That might be too intense, so maybe we want to do like 0.5. So let's just start with this. We can always change settings later. The other final thing I'm going to do that I forgot to mention before is we want to add some colors to the particles. So let's go back to our modifiers. The very first one is color mapper. That's what we want. We're going to drag this below Liquify in our particle group. And if you want to change the color, you can just go to the load preset on the gradient option and choose some of these if you'd like, or you can just manually change the colors by clicking on one of the notches here and then changing it. But I'm going to keep the setting for the color just for myself. I like that. I think that's fine. But I'm going to change the property to velocity. And I'm going to set this to either X, Y, or Z. So this is an option for you. And then I'm going to change the upper value to 200 centimeters. And let's just see what we get. So that's kind of what we're working with. And then as the particles interact with the spheres, they should change color a little bit. So you can see that happening. They get like a darker yellow as they hit those. So toning in these lower and upper values will affect that intensity of the color change. But by setting it to velocity and then setting this range of colors, it's saying depending on how the speed of the particles change, their colors will change. So because they interact with the spheres, they kind of slow down a little bit when that happens, and that changes the color. So that's kind of how that works. But let's maybe lower the value to 150 and see if we like that more. So yeah, I think that's a little bit more of an intense color change, so that's kind of nice. So maybe we'll keep that. To cache a particle sim, just go to your particle group. We're going to go to cache, and we'll cache our scene because we also have the soft body interactions going on in here, and we need that cached as well. Otherwise, it will just cache the particles and the spheres will stay in position. So let's hit cache scene, and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so we've cached things. We should now be able to scrub through and we can see our particle sim at any point, and the spheres will also dynamically be moving. So that's what I like to see. And again, we can always recache this later if we need to tone in some of our settings. Before I do anything else with materials, we need to actually create a liquid shell around these particles. And the way you do that is by going to simulate and then just grabbing this new liquid mesh. And I'm going to just change this exclude mode to include and just pull in our particle group. And when we do that, you should see now we have a mesh. So this is where you can play with all the settings that are in this liquid mesh layer. So I like to kind of just manually go around and play with all these settings, tweak them as I'd like. So sometimes set this close to anywhere between 1.5 to 2, I think is a good mark. And then you could play with this surface offset. You could add more steps if you want. And I also really like to tone in the smoothing and then the droplet section. So I'm going to take the smooth strength all the way up, and I might change these iterations a few times. And then I'm also going to play with this droplet scale. So you can start dragging this in if you want any droplets or no droplets. So I might take this up to like 40%. And then droplet threshold, it's going to change how far it's kind of looking for those droplets. So if you take this in or higher values, it will have less droplets in your scene. So this is just something to keep in mind. We've got a mesh now, so that looks fun. So we can hide our particle group. Now we should just be able to play through the liquids. So this is what that's looking like. And you can see it's kind of jagged at different spots. So that's where you can tone in those settings a little bit more. But we have those colors, and that's really important, and we like how that looks. However, the thing right now with the particle colors is it kind of looks like a watercolor painting. Like there's some weird edges in those, and we want that to be kind of smooth. And unfortunately, at the moment, you can't just add like a vertex color to the liquid mesh. You actually have to put it inside of a volume builder and volume mesher, and then you can start playing with that. So I'm going to drag in a volume builder and mesher, which are these two icons, and you want the builder underneath the mesher. And then we are going to drag our liquid mesh right into the volume builder. And make sure that in the export tab on the liquid mesh, the geometry is on. You want to make sure that is on. And we're going to go to our volume builder. And this is where we can kind of tone in some of these settings. So maybe we want to set this to like 5. And we could add an SDF smooth as well, just to smooth things out just a little bit. And then on our volume mesher, we're going to right click, go to other tags, and we're going to add a vertex color. Not a vertex map, vertex color. And once we have that, let's just pull in our particle group, and you can see our colors have now been communicated over to the volume mesher. So that's great, that's what we want to see. But I still see that kind of watercolory patchiness. So what you can do is click on the particle group that's in this field section here that we just dragged in, and set this mode to average, and that will just smooth things out. So this is where you can change that radius, which will control that smoothness or intensity. So make this whatever value you'd like. I'll just keep it on the default of 20. And now let's actually stay on the vertex color just so we can see this. Now you can just play and see how that's looking. So that's totally up to you. This is also where you can tone in some of that smoothness or jaggedness, and you could even pull in a dilate and erode by holding down this SDF smooth. And instead of offset being 5, you could set this maybe to like -2, and you could tone this in as you'd like also. And you know, you can always change that smoothing value again as well, and even play with the voxel size. So maybe set that to like 3. So let's preview this now, and again I want to have the vertex color on. So you can see we're getting that fun interaction of colors with the spheres, so that's what we want to have. It's a good sign. And this is where maybe we could start actually making some materials and playing with stuff there. So I'm going to grab a redshift camera. I'm going to set the focal length all the way up to 200. And I'm just going to drag this into a spot that I want for my scene. And then I'm going to go to my render settings and load in a preset that I have, which is just kind of a 2000 by 2200 for the resolution. And I'll just fix my camera layout now. Maybe right there is good. And now let's go to our material manager, and we're going to create a new standard material. We can drag this right on top of our volume mesher. And let's dive right in, because this is going to be how we add that color in the render to our fluid simulation. So we're going to need to search up the vertex attribute node. And now we can just drag that vertex color into the attribute name section. And we can connect this directly to color. And this should give the particles that same color, or the liquid that same color as our particle simulation that we have in that vertex color section. So you need to do this step in order to communicate that across. So if we now pull open our redshift render view, and if I just dock that to the side and hit play, let's get to a frame that we need. So now we can see those colors communicated. So make sure you do that step. I'm also going to create a glass material for our bubbles. So we'll call this glass, or you can call it bubbles or whatever you want to call it, and pull that onto our spheres. Let's double click in there as well. We are going to just set the transmission all the way up to 1. So just drag that value all the way up. And I'm going to take my roughness down a little, but I'm also going to go into our asset browser here. Let's drag that over. And I'm going to search for fingerprints. And I've done this before, but I like to pull this image in to my node editor and connect this to the roughness. And it will then apply a variety of rough tones based off of these fingerprints in this image to our bubbles. So that just makes things a little bit more interesting. And actually going back into the asset browser, I'm going to clear that out. And I'm going to go into the legacy section, HDRIs, and I'm going to pull in this 2 light setup HDRI to light my scene. So this will just make the materials look a little bit nicer too. And then I'm going to rotate this around 50 to 70, anywhere within there. So that just gives me a little bit of a nicer look to our scene. So we could play with that. You could also play with the IOR value on the reflection. So maybe set this up to around 2. And yeah, then we could just play through our scene a little and get a different feel for some other frames. I think that's pretty interesting. I'm also noticing our liquid material might be a little bit too rough. So let's take the roughness of that almost all the way down to 0. And what we can also do, let's dive back into that materials node editor. Let's drag this vertex attribute port into the standard material again. We're going to go to Subsurface and add this to color. So now if we go down to our standard materials properties for Subsurface, we can see that vertex attribute is plugged into the Subsurface color now. So if I increase this weight, it is going to be using that base color as a reference and scattering this white tone throughout. And it just looks a little bit slightly transparent around the edges and kind of washed out with that color. So whatever tone you give it here, that will kind of push through on those edges. So super fun to play with. Definitely something you should explore a little bit. So the other thing that I will just show you quickly, because I think this is kind of fun too, it takes a little bit of some extra steps and you will have to recache your scene, but I think it's worth it. We can also go to our spheres and add a couple of vertex map tags. So I'm going to add one, and in the first one, I'm just going to drag our volume mesher in here, and you're going to see right away that it then puts an outline around our spheres wherever that liquid mesh has been interacting. So I'm going to pause our redshift render view just so it's not causing some slowdown on the performance. And again, if we pulled our volume mesher into the vertex map on the spheres, it will mark up in 100% intensity anywhere where the liquid mesh is touching. So that's where you see these yellow areas. I'm going to take this and change it to surface, and I'm going to scale this down just a little bit. I want it to be as close to the actual liquid as possible, so maybe 4, but it becomes a little bit more jagged this way, and that's where it's helpful to have a second vertex map. So if we create another one, we also need to change the name so they're not exactly the same. So I'm just going to call it vertex map 2 to be easy, and let's also change the color. So we can go to icon, check icon color, and now it will be yellow. This will just help us distinguish this a little, and I'm going to drag it after the first one so we know this is 1 and this is 2. And then what we can do is directly drag the first vertex map into the field section, and you can see it adds it, and we see that yellow area again. But this time, let's also change the mode to average, and this lets us smooth out or blur that vertex map a little. So that's just been helpful for me in past tests because there isn't really a way to just blur a vertex map. So this is kind of the easiest way to do that. The other thing we can do now is if we return to our glass material, we're going to do a couple things here. We're going to add a material blender to our scene. So right after the first standard material, and we can actually plug that first one into the base material. And then I'm going to drag a copy of our standard material, and this will be a color that will implement wherever that yellow intensity is on our vertex map. So whatever you want to be showing in those areas, think of this as like if the liquid touched something that you want to look darker because it's wet, this is whatever color that wetness will be. So wherever something's damp, this is going to be how that color is determined. So I am going to maybe take the transmission all the way down. Maybe I want it to not be transparent wherever the liquid touches. And in fact, maybe I want this to glow wherever the liquid touches. So maybe I'll just set this to somewhere around 1, and maybe I'll set this to kind of a glowing yellow color. and we can plug this into material color for layer 1, which is actually layer 2, because we have a base material, and this is like the second one. But we need something to tell it to blend. So we need the vertex map that will tell us, here are the areas where you want that secondary color to be taking effect. So we can drag in a new vertex attribute, and I'm going to put that right there, and we can drag this into the blend color, and we need to also pull the right one into this attribute section, so we know that's the second one, vertex map 2, right here. And now we just need to put this output into the surface. So now we can hit play on our render view, and you can see it already took effect right here. That glowing yellow color is starting to implement here where the yellow intensity is on our vertex map. But the only thing I'm going to say too is, if you notice we play through our simulation, those places are changing all the time. Whereas if something was actually getting wet, it would kind of linger and be damp for a while. So the way we can make that happen is by going into our second vertex map. We're going to go into this clamp section and hold down, and you're going to find decay. And you're going to grab that, make sure it's above everything, and we're going to set that strength to maybe 90% instead of 50. So whatever value you have this at is going to control how long those things stay yellow in those areas that are affected. So if you have it at 100%, it will always be yellow depending on where it hits. If you set it to 90%, it will stay yellow for a long time, but then will slowly fade away back to 0. So if we play through this now, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So anywhere where those spheres are hit, they're going to be yellow, and they will start to fade, but they will linger around for a while, almost like they've become damp from the liquids, and then they fade slowly over time. Let's hit play on our render view. Whoops. So now you can see anywhere that's yellow in intensity, we're getting that other material, that blended material on our glass bubbles, but we also have the liquids moving around. So this is a nice way to just blend between two materials based off of where those liquids interact. This is kind of how you create a fun liquid simulation. We've got our glass bubbles, and we've got some nice blending between materials. The colors are being affected depending on the speed of the particles interacting with those soft bodies. So that's really fun and interesting. So I'm going to tweak some of my fluid settings a little bit again, just to tone those in. Again, there's a lot to play around with right now, but as Cinema releases more versions of the liquid system and the particle system, things will get a little bit easier to tweak in. So I'm going to maybe change my color gradients as well. Just keep playing around with this. And yeah, I'll be back when that's done. But I hope you guys have a ton of fun exploring how to make your own fluid simulations and this kind of lava lamp animation in particular. So super fun. I love doing this stuff. I hope you guys enjoy too. It's so good to be back with you guys for another tutorial. So sorry it's been a hot minute. I've had a lot going on with my personal life. Some things good, some things bad. But regardless, I'm happy to be back. Love this community. Hope you guys have tons of fun creating, and I'm excited to see what you do. All right, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. I'll speed through this next part as I kind of tweak and adjust some things, but it means a lot that you guys are here and watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. See ya, guys.